All right, so I just thought I'd do a quick stream today because of the horrifying news that I'm sure everybody's heard. That Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg just died, which of course means that respecting the precedent that he himself set in 2016, Mitch McConnell will leave the seat open to be filled by Biden if he wins. That is obviously gallows humor. That's not happening. Instead, the Republicans are going to certainly at least try to fill it as soon as humanly possible. And right now, the Democrats have very few options as to how to stop that because of the way the Senate rules have changed. I'm sure they'll try things to delay it, gum up the works. But right now we're in a situation where there's not really that much that might be done. So there's a 30 to 45 day background check process, on Jared or whoever Trump appoints to fill the seat, and then after that, we'll see how long the Senate takes. I think the real danger isn't even the seat being filled before the election, although that could be bad itself because Lord knows what sort of legal issues might come up pertaining to the election itself, leading up to the day of, that the Supreme Court could weigh in on, but really that it could be filled, either before the Supreme Court would hear the challenges that it seems like we're very likely to hear about the actual results. I see J. Andrew World, who's, by the way, the guy who does all the logos for the show, does very good work. If you need artwork, you should get it from him. But says he has no faith that Pelosi and Schumer could stall anything. And yeah, right. I mean, or Schumer's the relevant one. But yes, right. Like that's the there's no reason to have any faith in these guys playing the game well. And again, even if they did, I don't know how much they could really do. I think McConnell has almost all of the cards right now. And it seems like there is a very, very good chance that we're looking down the barrel of a Florida in the year 2000 kind of scenario here, because there are going to be so many mail-in ballots around the country because of the coronavirus. There are going to be so many people voting places that they don't normally vote because of the dislocation and the crisis, economic and public health that we've been going through for the last several months, that we could easily see Florida in 2000 times 5 times 10, and it would be very likely if that happens, and if the Trump administration doesn't respect the rule of law, which is that you could see all sorts of results being challenged, all kinds of issues, and that what we would have is not if by the time the Supreme Court heard those challenges, there was a Trump-appointed successor, then that means that the conservative majority on the Supreme Court has gone from 5-4 to 6-3, which is pretty grim, right? Because with 5-4, most things were going to break the Republicans' way, but with 6-3, that is that much worse because there was always the chance that John Roberts would be the sort of good little custodian of order and ruling class stability, and that in that role he would occasionally break with his party, like happened most famously with the Obamacare decision. So, and that, but of course, that's with 5-4, right? With Ginsburg in there. So you only needed one Republican justice to do that. But with a Trump appointed successor, then you would need two Republican justices to do that, which is vastly less likely. Well, actually, sorry, no, I misspoke. With a Republican, if the seat just goes unfilled, right? This is the very best case scenario. If the seat just goes unfilled until Biden takes office, and fill out the comforting fantasy however you want to there, that when Biden takes office, there's also a Democratic majority in the Senate, whatever, right? Like, in that scenario, until the Biden appointed successor fills Ginsburg's vacant seat, we're already looking at not getting any Supreme Court decisions tilted in the other direction from the Republicans without two defectors, because right now the balance in the court is 5-3. So one defector would just make it 4-4. So you need two defectors for any decision to go the Democrats' way. Good luck with that. And of course, with a Trump appointed successor, then you need three defectors for any decision to go the Democrats' way. And really, really good luck with that. So right now, again, best case scenario, the absolutely most optimistic thing you could say is if Chuck Schumer is much more dedicated to gumming up the works than we have any particular reason to be confident that he's going to be, and then somehow manages through some heroic series of delays to get this all delayed until Biden takes office. Of course, we're also assuming Biden wins. And honestly, that might just not happen anyway, right? That is very far from being in the bag. Yeah, I've seen all the polls where he's ahead, and he's ahead in most swing states that he needs. But if you assume that the polls are as wrong as they were in 2016, even with a popular vote victory, he could still honestly lose the electoral vote. Never like so. And then when you start to factor in, right, the very real possibility of various forms of fraud and disruption and undermining of what democratic process we have in our ridiculous half democratic two-party elections, then again the election scenario gets very grim. But assume that Schumer manages to keep the seat unfilled, assume that Biden wins the election, assume that Biden is then able to get through his Supreme Court pick without having to engage in some form of compromise more extreme than Merrick Garland, which didn't work anyway, then we're still looking at a scenario where anything that comes up between now and then, right, to go the Democrats' way, you need two Republican defectors, and that's pretty brutal. All right, quick word about Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself, I think, and how to think about this in relation to electoral politics and all of that stuff. I think that, without, speaking particularly ill of a human being who doubtless had good intentions, who just died of cancer, I think that you should be able to hold two thoughts in your head at the same time here. That one, the liberal cult of the notorious RBG was always ridiculous and embarrassing. That's true. And missed some really important things, which we'll talk about in a minute, right? That's true. But at the same time, that this extremely grim result does tell us something about the importance of electoral politics, even when we're talking about contests between people that we basically hate for good reason, who the left should regard as our bitter enemies for a good reason, like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016. So one reason that the notorious RBG cult was always a little ridiculous is that if you actually looked at her rulings, she generally, of course, went with the other Democratic appointed justices, and the other liberal justices, I guess some of which were appointed by Republicans way back when. But that also means that there were some pretty bad rulings on privacy and police interrogations. I remember some of that pretty recently. Some pretty bad rulings on eminent domain. So then the other half of the reason that sort of notorious RBG cult was ridiculous is the one that's shown by what we're talking about tonight, that the fate of what little democracy we have in this country could hang on whether somebody in her late 80s held on to life for another few months or not. That's a bizarre situation to be in a somewhat democratic country, that whether or not all sorts of policies that we might look at in the future, which have broad popular support, are able to become legislative reality depends on whether one extremely elderly woman holds on or not. And of course, she could have retired when Obama was president, especially in the early years while Obama was president. Let's not leave this out of the equation. But the larger point, the more significant point, right, is that the fact that any of this stuff depends on whether one individual chose to retire or not really shows the absurdity of the system. The fact that we have to do all of this Kremlinology about, let's see, Roberts might, make this decision for the sake of institutional stability. He might make that decision, and so light a candle and hope that Roberts decides that not letting Trump steal the election is going to be better for the institutional stability to serve the interests of capital. That is a absolutely absurd way for a republic to work. That's indefensible. And this really gets to another question, right? Two other questions, right? Let's start with the other one that I set up earlier, right? Why, yes, electoral politics does unfortunately matter quite a bit, even when we're talking about electoral contests between people we hate, people we should hate, people who deserve to be hated, like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Because if a few votes had gone differently in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. And so there are tactical lessons to be learned from that. I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but I do think that it is clearly true that the right tactical and strategic call is holding your nose if you live in a swing state. It's what I plan to do, unfortunately, because when I talked earlier about some of RBG's bad decisions, but when you look at stuff like the Janus decision to eliminate the power of public sector unions to collect agency fees, she and the rest of the Democratic justices were on the right side of that, and all of the Republican justices were on the wrong side of that, because even though the Democrats and the Republicans both represent the ruling class, right? Neither of them represent the interests of the working class, but the Democrats and the Republicans, and when I say the Democrats, I'm not talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'm not talking about Ilhan Omar, right? I'm not talking about Rashida Tlaib. Not talking about Cory Bush now, right? What I mean when I say the Democrats is the Democratic establishment, the centrists. Yes, those people do not represent the interests of the working class. They represent a strategy for managing the system on behalf of capital. Obviously, so do the Republicans, but that doesn't mean that the difference between those strategies doesn't matter for the working class. It does a lot. That the strategy for managing the system on behalf of capital that centrist Democrats represent is one that basically assumes, for example, in that Janus instance, that public sector unions will and should continue to exist. That sure, they'll undermine the bargaining power of workers in various ways. They're not going to be friends, but they're not going to try to flat out eliminate public sector unions, whereas the kinds of people who Donald Trump has appointed and will continue to appoint to the courts and to the National Labor Relations Board, these are people who, as I keep saying, their mission in life, what makes them get up every morning, is destroying what's left of collective bargaining in American workplaces. And so if you're looking at the long term, right, at what we can, like something that's a real solution, right, voting for horrible neoliberal Democrats to keep out rabidly right-wing Republicans is not a long-term solution to anything. It's very true that doing that just recreates the conditions that led to the rise of Trump in the first place. All of that is 100% true. No doubt whatsoever about that. But the question is, once we understand that these people are both our enemies, do we want the kind of enemy that's going to appoint Ruth Bader Ginsburgs to the court, who are going to make bad decisions in some areas, but are not going to do things like go along with attempts to destroy public sector unions? Or do we want the kind of enemy who has a much more aggressive strategy for managing the system on behalf of capital, and one that is going to try, for example, to eliminate the existence of public sector unions? And frankly, I think that question kind of answers itself. That if, in 5 years and 10 years, if the left finally gets its shit together, then in that situation, do we want to have some public sector unions left or not? Right? What position do we want to be starting from? And again, I think that's a very easy call. That if you're thinking of it as this moral decision, right? Whether or not you're going to bless one or the other of these candidates with the gift of your support, I completely understand saying, F that, I'm not going to do it, right? But if you understand as a tactical decision, like you're in a horror movie and Jigsaw or somebody has said, hey, here are these two doors, you can pick them, right? Which of these rooms do you want to fight your way through? And there's some monster that's going to try to kill you in each one of them. I know I'm mixing horror franchises a little. Well, do you say on principle I refuse to choose, or do you say I am going to pick the one that I think that me and my friends have a better chance of surviving? And that's what I would say here. But it's also important, the other half of this, the real on the other hand here, is that we also need to think carefully and seriously about the long-term strategy, because it is absolutely absurd that we're in this situation and that we would be in this situation again in the future, that we have to do all this Kremlinology, right? Ooh, is this Supreme Court justice going to defect, from the Republican bloc, for the sake of stability? Is there any chance that another one is? What is this one individual thinking, right? Is the Supreme Court justice going to throw everything into chaos by retiring, not retiring? Are they going to be able to hold off cancer for long enough, as if we were the subjects of a monarchy trying to figure out if the king was going to stay alive long enough to have a male heir? That's an absurd situation, and we do need to have better, more radical long-term horizons about how to stop it from reoccurring. So what does that look like? Well, obviously, I deeply love Bernie Sanders, and there's a reason that, I donated hundreds of dollars to his campaign and flew to Las Vegas to, canvass for him before the Nevada caucus. But one thing I think he was wrong about was the Supreme Court, that that he was very explicit about rejecting the idea of packing the Supreme Court with extra justices, like FDR tried to back when the Republicans were trying to block a lot of the New Deal programs in the 30s. And you got to revisit that, right? And really going forward, you really need to revisit this because it's, especially if, as seems very likely, McConnell is just better at this than Schumer is, and he's better at maneuvering, and anyway, he has way more cards right now than Schumer does. So assuming that McConnell gets that sixth conservative justice, then anything that you're looking at, right, for years or decades, right, that would be any sort of positive, important, progressive, or social democratic reform is just toast if you're willing, if you think that we just have to live with the Supreme Court as it exists. Because really, these people will find reasons, right? Even if, hey Lance, even if there is no conceivable legitimate legal reason to have a problem with the constitutionality of, you know, Medicare for all, for example, right? Clearly there isn't. That we've all been very clear for decades and decades that Medicare is constitutional. So why on earth would it be unconstitutional to to get rid of the age requirement and have it be Medicare for all? Trust me, these ghouls will come up with a reason to challenge the constitutionality of Medicare for all. If in any sort of scenario where, you know, some future, you know, President AOC or whoever was overseeing a Green New Deal, as absurd as it is, as thin as the reasoning would be, trust me, these ghouls will come up with some reason to say that the Green New Deal is unconstitutional. That this is just inevitable. It's who they are. It's like the frog and the scorpion, right? It's my nature. So if you're serious about any of these things, you have to have some sort of strategy for neutralizing or getting around, thwarting the power of the Supreme Court to act as the American, you know, like the capitalist guardianship council, you know, in the Iranian analogy, for how it works, right? And so I think we do need to start talking about things like, you know, fight for 15, right? Dollars an hour and 50 and Supreme Court justices. And there are ways, you know, because of course the obvious objection is that it's extremely unstable, right? That, you know, of course, okay, you pack it, then the Republicans will pack it, then you pack it, right? So two responses to that. One, there are ways to make it more stable, especially if you change the rules so so the seats rotate, right? So you have term limits on the Supreme Court rather than lifetime appointments. And so that way it's not like, okay, each person each side has to pack anew each time, right? Second part of the answer is that I think that if we got some real deep, serious social democratic reforms, you actually could build the kind of majority that would be stable over the course of a bunch of election cycles. Now, this is not to say that there's any scenario where like the Republicans never win another election or something like that. Of course that can happen, right? But the goal is that, so I guess I shouldn't have said the majority is stable cycle after cycle after cycle, although it could be more stable, right, with that kind of deep popular support. But what you could have is you could get in some of these really good, really important reforms, get them in, keep them in for long enough that everybody's gotten used to having them, has gotten used to the idea that, you know, every American has a Medicare card and is never going to have to worry about paying insurance again. And then by the time you would get the Supreme Court counterpacking, it's so ingrained that there would be hell to pay if you tried to get rid of it, right? I mean, this is kind of the same reason why there, even with Republican majority, right, we might not get an attempt to completely overturn as opposed to just chipping away at Roe v. Wade, because they know that really at this point there would be hell to pay if they tried. So ultimately, right, if nothing else, and I guess if there are any super chat questions or something, I'll take a few of those before I get off. But I'm not going to keep this up for very long because I have because this was kind of an impromptu thing, and I know. I wasn't planning on doing one of these tonight. I've only been doing one of these a week, once a week. But what with the extremely horrifying news that the timeline we're living in is even more freakishly nightmarish than we thought, it seemed like it was worth getting on and doing one now. Kind of in the same spirit. I remember I was in Brooklyn in January when the Soleimani assassination happened. In fact, I was just getting to Michael's apartment when that happened, and he did a quick impromptu stream then, and I think his girlfriend very quietly let me in while it was going on. But in any case, so I think that just to kind of wrap up the thought, right, what I would say about this would be that we've come to a real crossroads with this. Joe asks in Super Chat, just signed on, is there any possibility of stopping replacement? Any possibility? Yeah. Is there a significant possibility of it? Probably not, right? It's very, this is a really tricky situation for all the reasons we were talking about earlier. Just to kind of recap quickly, that one thing is that obviously McConnell's already said they're not going to respect the precedent they set in 2016 when they said that there was this rule that you could not appoint a replacement during an election year, right? Even though this is happening just before the election. Obviously, they're not going to respect that. I do expect Schumer and the Democrats to try to use whatever procedural tricks they can to slow it down. But given the way the Senate rules are right now, my understanding is that's going to be very difficult, even if you thought, A, that Schumer was as good at this as McConnell is, and B, that Schumer completely has his heart in it, which we'll see. So I think that's very tricky. I mean, I think short of like just mass destabilizing protests that would like really make them think twice about the stability of the system, I think it's very hard to see, there's a possibility it might happen, right? But it's very tricky. By the way, this is also why I thought that it was a long-term mistake in 2016 to talk about Merrick Garland's seat being stolen, because I thought then, right, hey, what if George W. Bush was still in office and he tried to appoint some, odious, union-hating, woman-hating conservative ghoul to the Supreme Court, like Republicans do. And the Democrats had found their spine and they managed to block that for a year so they could get in a Democrat and appoint somebody else. Would we say that Republican seat had been stolen? Clearly we wouldn't say that. We would say, wow, the Democrats are worth a damn for once. That's great. So, of course, I see people pointing out in the chat, right? There are mass protests, not about this, right? And again, I think if you saw mass protests on the level of what happened post George Floyd about the Supreme Court, I don't think you're going to. I think if you did, that would be enough to make these guys think twice about whether they wanted to play with fire about this stuff. Short of that, it's hard to say, right? And this is also why it's been such a huge mistake. One's bigger than Floyd. It might take that. This is also why it's such a massive mistake for anybody on the left who went along with at all of this ridiculous liberal and never Trump hand-wringing about norm erosion, because even before this, it was pretty clear that there was no possible way to get in the kind of reforms that we so desperately need, like a Green New Deal, like a Medicare for All, without some pretty serious norm erosion, right? If, there's no norm respecting way to do these things. And if that was true then, it's really true now, right? With, for now, a 5-3, potentially potentially by the end of the year, a 6-3. Yeah, somebody says every time the Dems complain about norm erosion, we should all call out norm, licking shears. But, potentially by the end of the year, a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court, the only way to have any prayer of a chance in a future Democratic Socialist administration to get through Medicare for All and a Green New Deal and all of this. Hell, realistically, the only way to even get through a public option and, whatever Biden's plan is for the environment that he refuses to even disclose the details of. I saw that. He said, oh, I don't believe in the Green New Deal. I have my own deal. But then he refused to say what was in his deal, right? But the only way to get through the mediocre, centrist, watered down versions, much less the stuff that we really need, like Medicare for All and Green New Deal, is to, never mind eroding the norms, we need to set the norms on fire with things like court packing, things like a level of grassroots resistance that we have not seen in this country in a long time, in some ways ever, right? Things like general strikes, right? Like we need to find, our inner French people, right? And act the way that French workers and farmers act when somebody pisses them off, right? And really engage in extraordinarily destabilizing forms of mass protest up to and including the level of things like general strikes, if we're going to get any of this stuff through at any point in the future now with a 6-3 Republican majority in the Supreme Court. If you want to preserve the norms, and frankly, right, as much as I love the guy, even Bernie Sanders, so he's been in the Senate for a while, had a little bit of that, okay, you have to do things in ways that respect the norms. He also did get the basic point here, right? I mean, this is why he always talked about a political revolution. As the Bernie movement went on, he just sort of, the phrase political revolution just sort of started to be used as a different way to say the Bernie movement, right? Join our political revolution. But when he first started talking about political revolution, this is more or less what he was talking about, right? The need to engage in real serious destabilizing, in his mind, nonviolent, presumably, but grassroots organizing on an unprecedented level to push through his agenda if he was in office. Somebody says now is the moment we need Buttigieg's convoluted centrist court plan. Yeah, good luck with that. So really, I mean, you are not going to get to the point where we could implement any kind of reforms that we need with a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court majority. I know I keep saying that phrase over and over again, but it's just kind of ricocheted around my head in all of its horror without learning to love the erosion of norms, right? Let's put it that way. All right. On that extremely unhappy note, I think that, if there's like a last super chat or two, I might take that. But otherwise, on that extremely unhappy note, somebody says, so we're effed. Yeah, I think that we are most likely effed. I think that there is a path out of this, but it is a very narrow path and a very steep path, right? So, I'm not telling anybody to swallow those black pills just yet, right? I think that we can, continue to hold out hope, but we just have to be real about what that hope looks like. That the path forward from here is not as easy, right, as it was. That we really, that we really need to get very real about what it would involve at this point to get to the point where even once we cross the hurdle of winning elections, which is hard enough, right? See earlier this year, right? But even if we do cross that hurdle, right, to get from there to, from taking power electorally to even being able to carry out a decent minimal social democratic agenda, never mind the more radical long-term horizons that people like me are committed to, workers' control of means of production, even just Medicare for all, right? Even to get there, we need to think through a strategy that's going to be much harder than it was looking even before this. And before this, if you hadn't noticed, it was pretty grim. So, I'm not going doomer here, but I am going be real about how narrow the ray of hope is, right? Be narrow about what the possibilities are. Andy says it's okay to blame the libs for putting us in the position we are in now. Yeah, of course, blame the libs all day and all night. I'm all for that. All right, I think I'm gonna sign off now because, like I said, this was just kind of an impromptu thing. Wasn't planning on doing this tonight. Still haven't had dinner yet. Just made a quick burger for my wife before I did this, but I haven't eaten yet, so I'm gonna go do that. But I am recording the podcast tomorrow. Always do that on Saturday afternoons. If you want to be in the not going to read that. If you want to be in the Zoom studio audience for that, just go to my Twitter, and the pinned tweet gives you the Zoom information. It should be fun. So the main guests are going to be Nando Vila and Emma Vigland, with going to talk to Nando about U.S. imperialism in Latin America. I'm going to be talking more about domestic politics with Emma. I'm sure we're going to be talking about this, right? It's hard not to. David Griscom, of course, is going to be on for Outlaws and Revolutionaries. We're going to talk a little Blaze Foley over a glass of whiskey at the end of the episode. And surprise extra guest this week, David Feldman, who some of you may know as a old lefty from way back, is going to be joining me for a few minutes at the beginning of the episode. So, looking forward to that. Check that out. Way back. As always, the episode, if you're a patron, you get the raw audio and video recordings right away. The nice edited version goes out into the world as a podcast Sunday night or Monday morning and premieres on YouTube 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. So see some of you then, see some of you in the chat for the recording of the episode tomorrow. Stuff is grim, but don't give up just yet, right? I've been reading about Thomas Paine as part of my research in the Christopher Hitchens book. I've been reading Hitchens' book about Thomas Paine. By the way, on page 37 of that book, he shouts out my friend Harvey K. So that was awesome to read. And so I just got to God, yeah. All right, now I'm all both inspired and depressed because somebody just mentioned the Lula thing about how they can't stop the coming of spring, which makes me think of being in Brooklyn for that last TMBS live show. But in any case, so thinking a lot tonight about that Thomas Paine thing, about the Sunshine Soldiers and Summer Patriots. That this is a pretty grim time, but don't give up. There is still a way out of this, and it's important to take that seriously because too much is at stake to just give up because things are looking bad. So solidarity forever. Left is best. I'll see you guys soon.